It was a strange title to this talk today, Things I'm Grateful to Donald Trump For. I knew it would strain the imagination and the credulity of many. So I want to put it in a context. The other night I was in a group, a Monday night group with senior Zen people. And we get together and we talk about practice and share stuff from long-term practice problems. And somebody was quoting the Buddha, or maybe it was Murray, I'm not sure who was being quoted, but the quote was about loving everyone. And it reminded me of a lifelong dilemma I had every time I hear that, love everyone. I don't love everyone. I'm not close to loving everyone. Maybe Buddha loved everyone. But I thought about it a lot, and one of the difficulties is that the language itself is imprecise. We say, I love yogurt, I love this perfume, I love this color, I love my children, as if it was a paint can with one color and that covered everything. Well, I always had a problem with that kind of love because it seemed like, no, I misspoke. I don't have a problem with that kind of love. But I do have a problem with the idea of feeling that way about everyone. So I thought about it. Language is perhaps the great gift of humanity, but it also charges a tax for its use. And the charge is that when we use words whose definitions are imprecise, or even when the definitions are precise, eventually we tend to reify nouns particularly as a thing. And we get in trouble that way. Once you say the word tree, you immediately identify the trunk and branches and leaves of the object in front of you, and you don't have to actually pay attention to it because the mind has this categorizing facility, and once it's identified, once you know what you're seeing, our default mode network in the brain just has us file it and move on, and it's a kind of efficiency which has led to our survival. I think I've talked before about the default mode network. The default mode network is the part of the brain that keeps us from being high all the time. It keeps us focused on the world of individuated forms, named objects, isolated things, but it relaxes under meditation and under psychedelics. And you can see the problem that would have existed had our forebears been transfixed by the beauty of a butterfly and missed the saber-toothed tiger behind them. So we use love, and we use lots of words imprecisely, and most of the time body language or context will help us. But this seemed like a really important distinction that was maybe tarnishing my spiritual practice. So it reminded me that back in the late '60s actually, my friend Running Deer, Nick Fosmo, I see Nicola's online here today, his daughter. He and I were living in a deep commune in Olima, and things were really squirrely, and we were in trouble, and I was the kind of leader by virtue of being the first person to settle there. And we didn't have a truck that could make the trip, so some guy showed up in a Ford Ranchero, and Nick and I asked to borrow it, and we did. We took it for a month. And we went out to the Hopi Reservation in Arizona, in Haute Villa, Arizona. City was probably built in the 700s. And the Hopis are pretty largely recognized as spiritual masters by all the other tribes. They live very strictly. For a long time, the villages didn't have electricity. They would rip up water and power lines when they came through. They lived in the high desert because they could make it rain. When they did the rain dance, it rained. And when the young men were all taken away in the draft from 1941 to 1945, it didn't rain. So these people have learned how to live in a very severe and strict place, and their entire life is based in spiritual practices. So Nick and I went to see this old man named David Menangi. David Menangi was a snake priest. And the snake priest is one of the guys that when they capture rattlesnakes from all over the territory and they keep them in an underground kiva for a month, praying to them and talking and shaking rattles and singing. At the end of that month, they do a dance, and at the end of that dance, young men grab fistfuls of snakes and they hold them aloft and they run to the 10 directions and they release the snakes with their prayers. So he was in his 90s when we got there, and we had been told that as white men we wouldn't be allowed to stay overnight in Haute Villa. But in fact, and when we got there, there were a bunch of young rodeo riding Indians in the house, and they told us to come back. David was eating. So we came back and we got into this room, and these guys were tough guys, and they just kept an eye on Nick and I. And his wife put a plate of beans and some tortillas in front of us, and we ate. We didn't say a word, just kept our mouths shut. Little by little, the rodeo riders disappeared, and David and his wife came, invited us over. They did a prayer. And we stayed there, I don't know, 7, 8 days maybe. And every day he would talk to us about the Hopi prophecies, things like that. And he invited us to stay over immediately, told me I could bring my dog in, gave us a guest bed, was extremely generous to us. One day we were listening to him sing, and he explained to us that the Hopis have hundreds of songs about water. He said, water is the rarest and most sacred thing that we have. It's precious. And we have hundreds and hundreds of songs about water. And then he got this little twinkle in his eye, and he said, you people have hundreds and hundreds of songs about love. Is that because it's so rare and scarce? That really stopped me, still stops me. Anyway, that was the context of love that I was thinking about in this Monday night meeting. And I've been thinking about it for a couple days, and so this is the way I'm thinking about it now. My small mind, little Petey Coyote, has its likes and its dislikes and things it's neutral about, has opinions, has bad habits, has all sorts of stuff. It's just a human being. And that mind is a discriminating mind. It makes distinctions between things. That's what it does. That's what language does. That's what perception does. But that's not big mind. And when we meditate, we step aside from that personality and we settle into big mind. And in big mind, there are no distinctions. We settle into formless emptiness before it becomes form. And that emptiness, that pregnant energy that's always becoming forms, like waves rising and falling in the ocean. It has formed for a while, then it settles back into the ocean. Has formed for a while, settles back into the ocean. That big mind has no distinctions. So from the perspective of that big mind, I can love everyone, but I don't love them in the same way that I love yogurt, or that I love my dogs, or that I love my kids or my girlfriend. And when you think about it for a minute, the greatest love that you can show people and things and the world itself is allowing it to be what it is. And when we sit zazen, we allow everything in the world to be what it is. beyond our judgments, beyond our little ideas of what's good and what's bad. Everything is operating out of its own history, its own karma, its own logic. Even unpleasant, rotten people have a right to be here and move toward enlightenment. I don't have to like them. But from the standpoint of big mind, it doesn't matter. And so my expression of love is to understand that everything on earth came from the moment just before, and that came from the moment just before, and that came from the moment just before. And I may not like it, but I daren't question its right to existence, because it was made by what made me, produced by that generative, formless, pregnant energy. So when I look at Donald Trump from that perspective, the very first thing I noticed when I watched him walk down out of a plane, out of the steps, was the way he gripped the side rail and the way he concentrated on the next step. And he never took his eyes off the steps. And the feeling I got was sort of an old, doddery man who was terrified of stumbling, terrified of making a mistake. And I thought, that's what his internal reality is. And I thought, wow, he's being punished by his own psyche every moment, minute by minute by minute. He lives in a kind of animal realm of being hunted or being hunted. But I'm not here to psychologize him. I'm not his doctor. But I can have empathy for that. But these are the kind of things that I was thinking about. So in 2015, there was a famous quarterback named Tom Brady for the New England Patriots. And you may remember the scandal. He let a couple of ounces of air out of a football so that he could grip it more firmly. And there was a huge uproar in the world of sports anyway, because people intuitively understood that the moment you violate norms and rules, you can't play the game. You can't play baseball without rules. You can't play football or basketball without rules or without norms. And people intuitively understood that about the world of sports. Well, one of the things I'm grateful to Donald Trump for is demonstrating the necessity of rules and norms in our political life. He gave us an object lesson, a negative object lesson, to show us how quickly our systems can be destroyed and weakened by people who don't observe rules and norms. So I'm grateful for that teaching. I'm grateful for his teaching me how fragile our democracy actually is. I remember when Obama was elected president, everyone breathed a sigh of relief, and we all went home, blogging, reading our phones. He said, Obama will do it. Obama will take care of it. And the only people out in the streets were the Tea Party. And the Tea Party moved America to the right a good couple of notches. We still haven't recovered. So I'm grateful for Donald Trump demonstrating to us that we have to be externally vigilant. It's like Ben Franklin answering the person who asked him, did you create a democracy or a republic? And Ben Franklin said, it's a republic if you can keep it. So Donald Trump showed us how fragile it is, how precariously balanced it is, how interdependent it is with rules and norms. So this time, I'm not going into blog. This time, a part of my everyday is going to be a citizen, to stay alert, to follow the news, to stay in contact with legislators, to stay in contact with other people. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for what he's taught me about humility. watching his pride and arrogance, watching him push the president of, not Macedonia, Romania, it's the neighbor of Romania. He pushed the president aside at the World Congress and stepped in front of him. You know, I'm Donald Trump. I'm the U.S. Here we go. It was so ugly to see. It was so ugly to see him attacking people and criticizing people and demeaning people that it showed me really clearly what it looks like. And my sarcasm may be less vitriolic than his. My snideness may be less cruel than his. But it's on the same spectrum. And so I could see that's what you look like. That's what you look like when you badmouth, when you consider yourself peerless, not part of a community. I'm grateful for what he taught me about the necessity of taking care of everyone as president or as a leader, keeping the tent large, keeping it open, and including everyone as equals. The lessons were stark and ugly. Watching militarized police take over the streets, buying all this surplus military gear to deal with civilians, to deal with their neighbors. Flash grenades, flak vests, tanks, troop carriers. This is all padding the Pentagon budget. It's not a way to keep the peace. I'm grateful for having had the opportunity to see that. I'm grateful for the opportunity he gave for many, many white people to finally understand the reality that African Americans have been living in for 250 years, and to join them in the streets and protest and say, this is not the kind of country we want. I'm grateful to him for exposing the actual values of the Republicans, making them public. There was an article a few days ago in Vanity Fair by an Indian political writer, not a Native American, an Indian. And he did a survey of voting from, I think it was around early 70s when Carter came into office. And in every single election since then, the majority of white people have voted Republican. Think about that. The majority of white men, pardon me, the majority of white men have voted Republican. And what that means is that they voted against the Equal Rights Amendment, they voted against voting rights, they voted against equality, they voted against national health care, they voted against an economic safety net. And his observation is that this vote expresses the desire that they would rather be the king of a ruined kingdom than live in a modern nation. They prefer a failed state rather than joining the Congress of industrial countries where everyone has medical insurance, everyone has higher education, everyone has a social safety net, strong unions, good employment. That the specter of superiority is so beguiling and so alluring that they would rather be king of the racist junkyard than a citizen in a modern, thriving democracy. It was an astounding article. I could see how it could get people angry because, of course, there were many white men that voted for Democrats. But what struck me was that the majority in every election voted for Republicans and voted for those values. So I'm grateful for seeing that clearly. I'm grateful for seeing voter suppression out in the streets, clear, present, dangerous, malignant. Everyone can see it. It's a subject of discussion. It's on the news. It's not fun to realize that I'm a citizen of a nation that half the population would rather be a failed state, but it's real. And it's a certain tonic to have it clarified. So all of these shadows of white privilege, racism, economic disparity, medical disparities, they were all pulled out of the gutter. They were all on high display. They were there when Obama was president. They were there when George Bush was president. You know, they've always been there. But by not being clear and present, they were not always addressed. So I'm grateful for the fact that we can address them now and we can work on them. So I pretty fully expect that at a certain point, when the votes are certified, President Trump will throw in the towel. Maybe he'll move to a non-extraditable country. Maybe he'll move to Russia. I don't know. And when President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris come into office, we have a decision to make as citizens, and whether or not we're going to make the extension of our spiritual life include our politics. Can we struggle without rancor? Can we struggle without anger? Can we stand for what's generous and best for everyone without letting our small minds pick winners and losers and guys we like and guys we don't like and build divisive teams? Katagiri Roshi, who started the Zen centers in I always get Michigan and Wisconsin confused. Excuse me. I actually taught there. Anyway, he said a thing once, when you go home, don't fight with your parents about Buddhism. If your parents are Christians, if you tell them how great Buddhism is, and if you insist on them hearing you, it's just going to be divisive. It's going to hurt your relationship. Just be kind to them. Be nice to them. Eventually, they will want to know what you're doing and what you're up to. So there are many, many times where we don't have to offer an opinion. We can just listen and say, I see it differently, but okay. Because if the goal is to generate harmony, if the goal is to allow people to be who they are, we have to practice that. Now, it doesn't mean that I might not put myself between somebody who was being threatened and somebody who was threatening. We don't allow them to do whatever they want. Boundaries, borders, rules, and norms. We can enforce those with our presence, with our statements. But if we do it in a way that pretends that we're not like those people, that we're somehow more elevated, more spiritually enlightened, groovier, cooler, hipper, we're just going to incur resentment and break into more and more obdurate tribes. So we have to think about how do I contribute to softening these hard, rancorous edges? How do I behave moment after moment? How do I deal with people moment after moment so that I'm not responsible for generating anger? I can take anger. You can be angry at me. It's not going to hurt me. I have friends that answer every Facebook or every tweet they get from an acquaintance or a friend who's a Republican or conservative or thinks with them differently. I think it's a real mistake. Because when you attack someone, they just harden their defenses. Better to just be friends. Don't talk about it. When I was working for Jerry Brown, my closest friend, who became really like a brother, was a conservative Republican on the Arts Council, head of the American Symphony Orchestra League. We couldn't have been more different. And yet we developed a friendship that was extremely deep, so much so that he called me the moment he was going into surgery. The morning he was going into surgery, he called me to just chat for a few minutes, and he died on the operating table. So most of the boundaries are in our heads. And in big mind, the divisions disappear. And to sit and meditate every day, to step aside or to drop below our personality and go into emptiness has been described in Soto Zen practice like walking in fog. You don't notice it, but if you stay out there long enough, you get drenched. Maybe that's enough for today. I do want to say that I'm changing the schedule of my Dharma talks. I'm going to start talking every 3 weeks instead of every week. I'm doing this because I've become so compacted with commitments that I'm not taking good care of myself. And I'm starting to feel like I could be offering a thin soup because I don't have time to study and to read and meditate as much as I'd like. So I'll announce it, but you can look on a 3-week basis. I'll be here. And for any people that want to discuss any issues of Buddhism, SF Zen Coyote, like San Francisco Zen Coyote at gmail.com is an email, and I try to answer all those emails I get. So thank you all for coming. I'm going to say the little metta prayer and sign out. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace. Thank you all so much for showing up. And please practice this trick of pressing down on your diaphragm a little bit when you meditate and putting your awareness down in that empty space behind your belly button. Makes a big difference. Thank you so much.